The dust-laden wind carried the sound of the mob before they appeared, a cacophony of rage echoing through the narrow streets of Black Hawk, Colorado in 1875. Willa Jensen ran as fast as her skirts would allow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a desperate bird seeking escape. Behind her, the angry voices grew louder, punctuated by the crack of a gun fired into the air. She had known the town would turn on her eventually, but not like this, not with torches and weapons and calls for her blood. Which murderer? The accusations flew at her back like bullets. Willa's lungs burned as she pushed beyond the last row of buildings at the edge of town. The mining settlement of Black Hawk had been her home for barely 3 months, but it would now join the growing list of places she could never return to. She had only tried to help, that was her crime. When little Tommy Wilson fell ill with fever, she'd offered the herbal remedies her grandmother had taught her. But when the boy died anyway, grief had transformed into superstition, and superstition into hatred. The open road stretched before her, but where could she go? The nearest town was miles away, and on foot she stood no chance. The mob was drawing closer. She could hear individual voices now. "There she is. Don't let her escape. She killed my nephew with her devil's brew. String her up." Willa stumbled on a rock, falling hard to her knees. Pain shot through her legs, but terror propelled her forward again. The plains ahead offered no shelter, no place to hide. Her long auburn hair had come loose from its pins, whipping around her face in the wind. Tears streaked her dust-covered cheeks. The thunder of hoofbeats cut through the yelling, and for a moment, Willa thought it was the town sheriff joining the pursuit. But instead of coming from behind, the sound approached from her right. A large buckskin horse galloped across the plains, a lone rider bent low over its neck. In one fluid motion, the rider changed course, positioning himself between Willa and the approaching mob. The buckskin reared up dramatically, forcing the front line of pursuers to skid to a halt. "That's far enough," the rider said, his voice calm but carrying clear authority. Willa stared at the back of the man who now stood between her and certain death. Broad-shouldered and steady, he sat tall in his saddle. A well-worn brown hat shaded his face, and a duster coat hung to the tops of his boots. A rifle rested across his lap, though he made no move to point it at anyone. "This ain't your business, stranger," Sheriff Holloway called out, stepping forward from the crowd. "That woman's wanted for murder." The rider didn't blink. "Is that so? Then you'll have a trial with evidence presented before a judge, I expect." His question was met with uncomfortable silence. The 20 or so townspeople shifted on their feet, exchanging glances. "She killed Tommy Wilson with her witch's potions," someone shouted from the back. "Boy died of mountain fever," the rider replied. "Same as took 3 children in Silverdale last month. Heard about it when I passed through." His voice remained steady, reasonable. "Unless you've got proof she did something other than try to help, this looks more like a scared mob than justice." Sheriff Holloway's hand hovered near his gun. "Step aside, mister. I don't know who you are, but name's Ethan Harlow," the rider cut in. "And I know what a witch hunt looks like, saw enough of them during the war." He shifted slightly, the movement causing his duster to fall back, revealing a holstered revolver. He still didn't reach for it. "Now, if the lady's actually committed a crime, I'll escort her to the territorial court in Denver myself. But I won't stand by while you string her up without a fair hearing." Willa remained frozen, her eyes darting between her unexpected defender and the mob. She could slip away now, perhaps, while they were distracted. But where would she go? The sheriff's face reddened. The Wilson boy was fine until she gave him that concoction, and was already sick enough that his family asked for help, Ethan countered. "Far as I can tell, The only crime here is being the last person to try helping before the inevitable happened. He turned slightly, his profile now visible to Willa. Strong jaw, a few days' stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm, steady and unafraid. The tension hung in the air like the promise of lightning. Someone in the crowd muttered about taking them both, but no one moved forward. Ethan's calm seemed to be having an effect, cooling the mob's fever. Or perhaps it was simply the reality of confrontation after the momentum of the chase. "I'm taking her to Denver," Ethan announced, as if the matter was settled. "If there are legitimate charges, file them with the territorial court." He backed his horse toward Willa, never taking his eyes off the crowd. "Madam, if you'll get up behind me." Willa hesitated only a moment before accepting his outstretched hand. His grip was strong as he pulled her up onto the horse behind him. She had no choice but to trust this stranger. The alternative was facing the mob alone. "This isn't over," Sheriff Holloway warned, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "For today it is," Ethan replied. With a gentle nudge, he turned the buckskin away from the crowd. "Hold on tight," he murmured to Willa. She wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse started forward at a walk, then broke into a canter. Willa resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on not falling off. The warmth of the man in front of her was the first comfort she'd felt in hours. They rode in silence until Black Hawk was just a smudge on the horizon behind them. Only then did Ethan slow the horse to a walk. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. "No," Willa replied, her voice hoarse from running and fear. "Just scratches. Thank you for what you did back there." The words seemed woefully inadequate for saving her life. "Ethan Harlow," he said, as if they were meeting under normal circumstances. "Willa Jensen." She loosened her grip on his waist, suddenly aware of how tightly she'd been holding on. "Were you serious about taking me to Denver?" "That depends," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "Are you actually guilty of something I should know about?" Despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. "No, I tried to help a sick child with herbs my grandmother taught me about. The fever was too advanced. I couldn't save him." Ethan nodded. "Figured as much. People get scared when children die. They look for someone to blame." "This isn't the first town I've had to leave," Willa admitted. "Though it's the first time with torches and guns." "Where were you heading before I intervened?" Willa sighed. "Nowhere in particular, just away." "Well, Miss Jensen, I'm heading to a place called Redemption Valley. Small settlement about 3 days' ride from here. I know the folks there. They're good people who might appreciate someone with healing knowledge." He paused. "Or I can take you to Denver if you prefer, though I can't promise the reception will be any friendlier." Willa considered her options, which were painfully few. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people do nothing in the face of injustice." There was a story there, Willa sensed, but now wasn't the time to press for it. "Redemption Valley sounds promising," she said finally. "If they'll have me." "Good," Ethan replied. "We'll make camp soon. It'll be dark in a couple hours." As they continued riding, Willa gradually relaxed. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, and the solid presence of the man who had saved her life, lulled her into a strange calm after the terror of the day. She found herself studying the back of his neck, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar. He couldn't be much older than her own 22 years, perhaps 28 or 29. But there was a weathered quality to him that suggested he'd seen more than his share of hardship. By the time Ethan guided the horse off the trail toward a small cluster of cottonwood trees near a creek, the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery orange and deep purple. Willa's legs were stiff and sore as she slid down from the horse, unaccustomed to riding. "I'll get a fire going," Ethan said, already gathering fallen branches. "Got some jerky and beans in my saddlebag if you're hungry." "I am, thank you." Willa rubbed her arms against the evening chill. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Water's fresh in that creek if you want to fill the canteen." He nodded toward a battered metal container hanging from his saddle. "I need to tend to Sadie here first." He patted the buckskin's neck affectionately. As Willa took the canteen and headed to the creek, she heard him speaking softly to the horse, words of praise and reassurance. It made her smile despite everything. A man who spoke gently to animals was rarely cruel to people. She filled the canteen and returned to find Ethan had already started a small fire. He had removed the saddle from Sadie and was brushing her down with methodical care. "She's beautiful," Willa commented, setting the canteen down near the fire. "And knows it," Ethan replied with a hint of a smile. "Best horse I've ever had. Smart, too." "How long have you had her?" "5 years now. Got her after the war when I started ranging." He finished with the brush and gave Sadie a final pat before turning his full attention to the fire. Willa sat down on a flat rock near the flames, grateful for the warmth. "You mentioned the war before. You fought?" Ethan nodded, his expression suddenly guarded. "Union cavalry, nothing I care to dwell on." Willa recognized the look of a man carrying ghosts. She'd seen it often enough after the war. "I understand." They ate a simple meal of jerky, beans heated in a small pot, and hardtack that Ethan softened in the bean broth. It wasn't fancy, but to Willa's empty stomach, it was a feast. "What takes you to Redemption Valley?" she asked after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a while. "I do odd jobs for the rancher there, James Buchanan. Good man, fair. I help with cattle drives, handle trouble when it comes up." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I'm what you might call a drifter with an anchor point. Redemption's where I come back to between jobs. And you think they'd accept someone like me?" Willa couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. Ethan looked at her directly, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "Buchanan's wife was Cheyenne. Their daughter runs the general store. Town's got a Chinese blacksmith and a former slave as the schoolteacher. They're used to folks who don't quite fit elsewhere." Willa felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. "It sounds too good to be true." "It's not paradise," Ethan cautioned. "Still the frontier. Hard work, harsh weather, occasional trouble. But folks there judge you by what you do, not where you came from or what others say about you." As the night deepened around them, they talked more. Willa told him about growing up in Missouri, learning herbal medicine from her grandmother, and how after both her parents died of influenza, she'd started moving westward, staying in towns only until something went wrong: a failed treatment, a jealous wife, a suspicious preacher. Ethan spoke less of his own past, but shared stories of the places he'd been, the people he'd met on his travels. When it came time to sleep, Ethan offered her his bedroll. "I'll keep watch for a while," he said. "Old habits." "Thank you," Willa said, wrapping the blanket around herself. It smelled of horse, leather, and pine, not unpleasant. For everything. Ethan merely nodded, settling himself against a tree trunk with his rifle across his knees. The last thing Willa saw before drifting into exhausted sleep was his profile against the starry sky, steady and vigilant. She woke once in the night, momentarily disoriented until she remembered the events of the day. Ethan was still sitting upright, though his head had dropped forward in sleep, his hat tipped low over his eyes. In slumber, the hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger. Willa pulled the blanket tighter around herself and closed her eyes again, feeling safer than she had in a very long time. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the soft nickering of Sadie greeting the new day. Willa opened her eyes to find Ethan already up, brewing coffee in a small pot at the edge of the rekindled fire. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring the dark liquid into a tin cup. "Better than I expected to," Willa admitted, sitting up and trying to smooth her hopelessly tangled hair. "Though I imagine I look a fright." Ethan handed her the cup. "You look like someone who outran a mob yesterday. Nothing to be ashamed of in that." Willa accepted the coffee gratefully, cupping the warm metal between her palms. "Do you think they'll follow us?" "Doubt it," Ethan replied, pouring coffee for himself. "Most mob fury burns out quick when confronted. By now, they're probably telling themselves they were justified in their anger but might have overreacted a bit." He took a sip. "Besides, we're heading away from the usual routes." Sheriff seemed the type to talk big but not track someone across open country. They broke camp quickly after a breakfast of more jerky and the last of the hardtack. As Ethan saddled Sadie, Willa washed her face in the creek, trying to make herself somewhat presentable. She'd left Black Hawk with nothing but the clothes on her back, a simple brown dress, now torn at the hem and dirt-stained, and a shawl that had nearly been lost in her flight. "I must be quite a burden," she said as Ethan helped her up onto Sadie's back. "Slowing you down, eating your food." "I've carried worse burdens," he replied simply, swinging up into the saddle in front of her, "and traveled with less pleasant company." The day passed in alternating periods of conversation and comfortable silence. They rode steadily northwest, following game trails and crossing small streams. The landscape gradually changed from the foothills near Black Hawk to more open, rolling prairie dotted with stands of aspen and pine. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in late spring. Ethan pointed out landmarks and shared knowledge about the land they traveled through, which plants were edible, which tracks belonged to which animals, how to read the weather from cloud patterns. Willa, in turn, told him about the medicinal properties of plants they passed. Their conversations flowed naturally, and Willa found herself laughing at his dry observations more than once, something she wouldn't have thought possible just a day after nearly being lynched. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow with a good view of the surrounding area. After another simple meal, enhanced this time with a rabbit Ethan had shot during the afternoon, they sat by the fire as the stars emerged overhead. "Tell me about your family," Ethan said unexpectedly. "If you don't mind speaking of them." Willa pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "There's not much to tell. My father was a carpenter, good with his hands, always smelling of wood shavings. My mother taught piano to the children of wealthy families in our town. She wanted me to learn too, but I was more interested in following my grandmother into the woods, learning about plants." "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Willa smiled at the memory. "Half Cherokee, though few in town knew it. My grandfather met her when he was trading in the territories before they were married. She knew every plant that grew in Missouri and what it could do, heal or harm." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That kind of knowledge is getting scarce. Progress has its costs." "What about your family?" Willa asked, curious about the man who had so dramatically entered her life. Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Father was a blacksmith in Pennsylvania. Mother died when I was young. Have a brother somewhere in California last I heard." He poked at the fire. "We weren't close after I came back from the war, different views on things." There was something in his tone that discouraged further questions on that subject. Instead, Willa asked, "How did you end up in Colorado?" Came west after Appomattox. "Needed open sky." He looked up at the stars. "Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army, tried my hand at prospecting for a spell. Nothing stuck until I found Redemption Valley." His expression softened slightly. "Place has a way of catching hold of you. It sounds special." "It's just a place," Ethan said, but his tone belied his words. "But the people make it worth coming back to." As the fire burned down to embers, Willa found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. The rhythmic chirping of crickets and the soft sounds of Sadie grazing nearby created a soothing backdrop. "Get some sleep," Ethan said, noticing her drowsiness. "Another long day tomorrow. What about you? I'll join you shortly. Just want to make sure the fire's properly banked." Willa hesitated, then offered, "We could take shifts if you like. I'm not helpless, you know." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. "Never thought you were, Miss Jensen, but I don't sleep much anyway. Old habits from the war." Willa nodded, understanding. She settled into the bedroll, watching as Ethan methodically checked his rifle before leaning back against his saddle. Hat tipped low over his eyes, but clearly still alert. She wondered what he had seen during the war that made constant vigilance so ingrained, what burdens he carried that kept sleep at bay. But those were questions for another time if he ever chose to share them. The second night on the trail, Willa dreamed of Black Hawk, of angry faces and reaching hands. She woke with a start, a small cry escaping her lips before she could stop it. Instantly, Ethan was alert, hand on his revolver. "What is it?" "Just a dream," Willa said, embarrassed. "I'm sorry I woke you." Ethan relaxed slightly, though his eyes still scanned their surroundings. "You didn't. I was awake." The night was clear, the moon casting silver light across the landscape. Willa sat up, knowing sleep would elude her for a while. "Do you ever have nightmares about the war?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. "Sometimes," he finally admitted, "less now than before." "What helps?" Willa asked softly. "Time, distance." He looked up at the stars. "Reminding myself that I'm here, not there, that what's done is done." Willa nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. "I keep seeing their faces, the people from town, the hatred in their eyes." She shuddered. "I've never had anyone want me dead before." "Fear makes people capable of terrible things," Ethan said. "Especially fear mixed with grief. I know, I even understand why they blamed me." Willa sighed. "I just wish I could have saved that boy." "Some things are beyond saving," Ethan said quietly. "That's a hard lesson to learn." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds washing over them. Eventually, Willa felt her eyelids growing heavy again. "Thank you," she murmured as she lay back down. "For what? For listening, for understanding, for not judging." Ethan's response was so soft she almost didn't hear it. "We all need that sometimes." The third day of travel brought them to higher elevation, the trail winding through pine forests and across meadows bright with early summer wildflowers. Willa's body had adjusted somewhat to riding, though she still felt the ache in her muscles each morning. "We should reach Redemption Valley by sundown," Ethan said as they paused to rest Sadie near a mountain stream. "It's in that valley beyond the next ridge." He pointed ahead to where the mountains parted, revealing a glimpse of green pastureland. Willa felt a flutter of anxiety. "What if they don't welcome me? What if word has spread about what happened in Black Hawk?" Ethan looked at her steadily. "Then we'll deal with it. But Buchanan's not the type to turn away someone in need without hearing them out first." He hesitated, then added, "And if it doesn't work out, we'll find somewhere else." The casual we caught Willa by surprise. She had assumed Ethan's assistance would end once they reached his destination. Before she could ask what he meant, he was already back in the saddle, holding out his hand to help her up. The descent into Redemption Valley was one of the most beautiful sights Willa had ever seen. The valley floor spread out below them, a patchwork of meadows, farms, and the silvery thread of a river winding through the center. The settlement itself was nestled against the base of the western mountains, not large, perhaps 30 buildings in all, with a main street and smaller lanes branching off it. Beyond the town proper, Willa could make out the sprawling buildings of what must be the Buchanan Ranch. "It's lovely," she breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "Home," Ethan said simply, but the word carried weight. As they rode down the trail into the valley, Willa felt both anticipation and trepidation building in her chest. Would this place truly offer the refuge she sought? Or would it be just another stop on her increasingly desperate journey? They reached the outskirts of town just as the sun was setting, painting the western mountains in gold and pink. People on the street nodded greetings to Ethan, looking curiously at Willa, but not with the suspicion she had grown accustomed to elsewhere. Ethan guided Sadie directly to a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Wayfarer's Rest. He dismounted and helped Willa down, her legs stiff from the day's ride. "Molly runs the best boarding house this side of Denver," he explained, tying Sadie to the hitching post. "We'll get you a room for the night, then in the morning I'll take you out to meet Buchanan." Before Willa could respond, the door of the boarding house burst open, and a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun emerged onto the porch. "Ethan Harlow, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed, hands on her hips. 3 months without a word, and you show up on my doorstep at supper time with no warning." Despite her scolding tone, her face was creased in a warm smile. "Evening, Molly," Ethan said, tipping his hat with a hint of sheepishness. "Got room for 2 weary travelers." Molly's sharp eyes turned to Willa, taking in her trail-worn appearance and disheveled hair. Instead of the judgment Willa expected, the older woman's expression softened with compassion. "Of course I do. You know you've always got a place here." She stepped forward, extending a hand to Willa. "I'm Molly O'Brien, proprietress of this establishment, and you are Willa Jensen," she replied, grateful for the woman's straightforward manner. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. O'Brien." "It's Miss, though at my age the distinction hardly matters," Molly said with a wink. "Come in, both of you. Supper's almost ready, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bath." She shot a knowing look at Ethan. "I expect there's a story here, but it can wait until you've both had a chance to rest." The interior of the boarding house was clean and welcoming, with a large dining room on the first floor and a staircase leading to the guest rooms above. Delicious smells wafted from the kitchen at the back. "Sarah," Molly called, and a young girl of perhaps 15 appeared from the kitchen. "Show Miss Jensen to the blue room and draw her a bath, and find her something clean to wear. Perhaps one of Lizzie's old dresses would fit." "Yes, Miss Molly," the girl replied, gesturing for Willa to follow her upstairs. "Ethan, your usual room is available," Molly added. "I'll have a bath drawn for you after supper. You both look like you've been through the ringer." As Willa followed Sarah upstairs, she glanced back to see Ethan watching her, a reassuring nod conveying that she was safe here. For the first time since fleeing Black Hawk, Willa allowed herself to fully exhale, the tension that had kept her spine rigid slowly releasing. The blue room was small but charming, with a brass bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window overlooking the town's main street. Sarah brought hot water for the bath, which was set up behind a screen in the corner, and returned shortly after with a simple but clean dress of blue calico. "Miss Molly says to take your time, miss," Sarah said. "Supper won't be for another half-hour." Left alone, Willa sank gratefully into the bath, the hot water soothing her aching muscles and washing away 3 days of trail dust. As she scrubbed her skin and hair clean, she found herself thinking of Ethan. In just 3 days, he had gone from stranger to what? Protector, friend. Something stirred in her chest when she thought of his steady presence, his quiet strength. She dismissed the feeling as simply gratitude. After all, the man had saved her life. It was natural to feel a connection to him, nothing more. When Willa descended the stairs for supper, wearing the borrowed blue dress with her damp hair neatly braided, she found the dining room occupied by several people. Ethan sat at one end of the long table, freshly washed but still in his trail clothes. Beside him was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples, engaged in serious conversation. 3 other boarders, 2 men who appeared to be miners or railroad workers, and an elderly woman completed the group. Molly emerged from the kitchen carrying a large pot of stew, her face lighting up when she saw Willa. "Ah, there you are, my dear. Come, sit down. You must be famished." Willa took the empty seat across from Ethan, who looked up and met her eyes with a nod of approval at her transformed appearance. The conversation paused momentarily as introductions were made. "This is Albert Green, our town doctor," Molly said, indicating the silver-haired man beside Ethan. "And Mrs. Winters, who's visiting her daughter, and Mr. Barnes and Mr. Sullivan, who work for the railroad." "Doctor." Green studied Willa with intelligent eyes. "Miss Jensen, Ethan was just telling me you have knowledge of herbal medicine." Willa shot a surprised glance at Ethan, who gave a slight shrug. "My grandmother taught me," she said cautiously, "though I'm no doctor." "Don't sell yourself short," Ethan interjected. "She knows more about healing plants than anyone I've met." The doctor looked intrigued rather than dismissive. "I'd be interested to discuss your knowledge sometime. Western medicine has much to learn from traditional practices." Willa blinked in surprise. This was not the reaction she typically received from medical professionals. "I'd be happy to share what I know." The conversation flowed easily through the meal, which consisted of hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. No one pressed Willa about her past or how she came to be traveling with Ethan, for which she was grateful. Instead, they talked of local matters, the spring cattle roundup, plans for the town's Independence Day celebration, news from the railroad. After dinner, Ethan and Dr. Green stepped outside for a smoke, while Molly shooed the other boarders off to their evening activities. Left alone with Willa as they cleared the table, Molly finally broached the subject of her arrival. "I've known Ethan Harlow for 5 years," she said conversationally as she stacked plates. "Never seen him bring anyone to town before, let alone a pretty young woman. Must be quite a story." Willa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He helped me when I was in trouble. I had to leave Black Hawk rather suddenly." Molly's shrewd eyes assessed her. "Running from something or someone?" "An angry mob," Willa admitted, deciding honesty was best. "A child died under my care. I tried to help him with herbs, but his fever was too advanced. The town decided I was a witch." To Willa's surprise, Molly merely nodded. "Wouldn't be the first time someone with healing knowledge was persecuted by the ignorant. My own grandmother was driven from her village in Ireland for similar reasons." She patted Willa's hand. "You're safe here, child. Redemption Valley has its share of outcasts and misfits. It's why most of us are here." "Ethan mentioned taking me to meet Mr. Buchanan tomorrow," Willa said. "He thought there might be a place for me here." "James is a good man," Molly confirmed. "His wife, Morning Star, was a healer among her people before she passed. He respects the skill." She gave Willa a considering look. "The ranch hands are always getting themselves injured, and the nearest doctor is right here in town, but Buchanan's property is vast. Someone with your knowledge would be valuable." Hope blossomed in Willa's chest. "Do you really think so?" "I do," Molly said firmly. "And if Ethan vouches for you, that's good enough for most folks around here. He doesn't give his trust easily, but when he does, it means something." Later that evening, as Willa prepared for bed in the comfort of a real room for the first time in days, a soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Ethan standing in the hallway, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the confined space. "Just wanted to make sure you're settled," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the other boarders. "And to let you know I'll be by in the morning to take you out to Buchanan's." "Thank you." Willa smiled, suddenly shy in this new context, away from the intimacy forced upon them by the trail. "For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Ethan shook his head. "No debt between us. I did what anyone should have done." "But not what anyone would have done," Willa countered softly. "Most would have ridden past and pretended not to see." A shadow crossed his face. "I've done enough riding past in my life. Learned the hard way that some regrets stay with you." He straightened, changing the subject. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new start." As he turned to go, Willa impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Ethan, I'm glad it was you who found me." Something flickered in his gray eyes, surprise, warmth, and something deeper that Willa couldn't quite name. "Good night, Willa," he said, his voice rougher than before. Willa slept deeply that night, lulled by the safety of walls and the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, she might have found a place where she could belong. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of a warm day. Willa dressed in the blue calico dress, which Molly had insisted she keep, and went downstairs to find Ethan already at the table, deep in conversation with a striking woman with copper skin and dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Willa," Ethan said, rising as she entered. "This is Naomi Buchanan, James Buchanan's daughter and owner of the general store." Naomi extended her hand with a warm smile. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Jensen. Ethan was just telling me about your knowledge of medicinal plants. It seems he's been singing my praises to everyone in town," Willa said, shooting Ethan a pointed look that he met with a shrug. "Only to those who might appreciate your skills," he replied. Over breakfast, Naomi proved to be intelligent and direct, asking Willa about specific plants and their uses. By the time they'd finished eating, Naomi was nodding with approval. "Father will definitely want to meet you," she said. "And if you're willing, I'd like to discuss stocking some of your preparations in my store. Good medicine is always in demand." After breakfast, Ethan and Willa set out for the Buchanan ranch. This time, Willa rode a gentle mare named Daisy that Ethan had borrowed from the livery stable. It felt strange to be on her own mount after days of riding double with Ethan, but also liberating. "You ride well for someone who claims not to have much experience," Ethan observed as they followed the road out of town. "I'm a quick learner," Willa replied with a smile. "And I had a good teacher these past few days." The Buchanan Ranch was impressive, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several barns and outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding hillsides. As they approached, Willa saw a man emerge from the main house onto the wide porch, tall and broad-shouldered with a mane of white hair and a beard to match. "That's Buchanan," Ethan said. "Straightforward man. Tell him the truth and you'll do fine." James Buchanan greeted Ethan with a hearty handshake and turned curious eyes to Willa as introductions were made. He listened attentively as Ethan explained how they'd met, his bushy eyebrows rising when the story of the mob was related. "Come inside," he said when Ethan finished. "This calls for coffee, at the very least." The interior of the ranch house was comfortable and well appointed, with a mixture of traditional Western furniture and Native American artifacts displayed with obvious respect. In the large kitchen, Buchanan himself prepared coffee, waving away Willa's offer of help. "So, Miss Jensen," he said as they settled at the kitchen table, "Ethan tells me you're knowledgeable about healing plants. My late wife was a healer among the Cheyenne. I've seen the value of such skills firsthand. I'm still learning, Willa said honestly. My grandmother was my teacher, but she passed before she could share all her knowledge. I've been adding to what she taught me through observation and experimentation. Buchanan nodded thoughtfully. Honest about your limitations. That's good. He sipped his coffee. I've been thinking for some time that we need someone with medical knowledge here at the ranch. Dr. Green in town is excellent, but he's a half-hour ride away at best, longer if the weather's bad. Had a hand break his leg last winter, nearly lost it because we couldn't get the doctor here in time. Hope stirred in Willa's chest. Are you offering me a position, Mr. Buchanan? I'm considering it, he replied frankly. Would need to see your skills in action first. But if Ethan vouches for you, that carries weight. He's not easily impressed. He glanced at Ethan, who remained impassive. What do you think, Miss Jensen? Would you be interested in such an arrangement? Room and board here at the ranch, plus a small salary, in exchange for tending to the medical needs of my people. Willa hardly dared believe what she was hearing. After months of rejection and suspicion, to be offered not just sanctuary but respect for her abilities seemed almost too good to be true. I would be very interested, she said carefully, but I should tell you that there's a chance people from Black Hawk might come looking for me. I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your door. Buchanan's laugh was unexpected and booming. Miss Jensen, this is the frontier. Trouble is a regular visitor. Besides, we have Ethan here when trouble needs special handling, he sobered. But I appreciate your candor. It speaks well of your character. The rest of the morning was spent touring the ranch, meeting some of the hands, and discussing what Willa's duties might entail. By noon, it was settled Willa would have a 2-week trial period, after which both she and Buchanan would decide if the arrangement should continue permanently. You can stay in the small cabin near the herb garden, Buchanan said. My wife used it as her workroom. It's been empty since she passed 3 years ago. As they were preparing to leave, Buchanan took Ethan aside for a private word. Willa couldn't hear what was said, but when Ethan returned to where she waited with the horses, his expression was thoughtful. Is everything all right? She asked as they mounted up. Fine, Ethan replied. Buchanan just asked me to stay on at the ranch for a while, said he has some work that needs doing. Oh, Willa wasn't sure why this news should make her heart lift, but it did. So you'll be nearby. Looks that way, Ethan said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. For a time, at least. They rode back to town together, making arrangements for Willa to move to the ranch the following day. As they parted at the boarding house, Willa found herself reluctant to say goodbye, even temporarily. Thank you again, she said, looking up at him from Daisy's back. For everything. Ethan's gray eyes held hers. You're going to be fine here, Willa Jensen. This place has a way of healing those who need it most. As he rode away toward the livery, Willa had the distinct impression he was speaking from experience. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Willa settled into life at the Buchanan Ranch. The cabin that became her home was perfect for her needs: a small bedroom, a main room with a fireplace and work table, and shelves for storing herbs and preparations. The herb garden, somewhat neglected but still thriving, contained many plants she recognized and some she didn't, which Morning Star had brought from her Cheyenne traditions. Willa quickly proved her worth, treating everything from minor cuts and burns to a case of croup in one of the ranch hand's children. Her gentle manner and effective remedies won over even the most skeptical of the cowboys. Buchanan was clearly pleased with her work, and when the 2-week trial period ended, he offered her the position permanently. You've brought something this place has been missing, he told her. Not just healing, but a certain spirit. Reminds me a bit of my wife. Throughout those weeks, Ethan remained at the ranch as well, repairing fences, breaking horses, and doing other odd jobs. He and Willa saw each other daily, sharing meals in the main house and occasionally crossing paths as they went about their duties. Their friendship deepened through these casual encounters, though Willa found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that went beyond mere gratitude or friendship. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Willa was in her cabin preparing a poultice for one of the ranch hands who had suffered a deep splinter wound when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found Ethan standing there, hat in hand. "Evening," he said. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Willa replied, stepping back to let him in. "Just finishing up something for Diego's hand." Ethan glanced around the cabin, which Willa had made distinctly her own, with bundles of drying herbs hanging from the rafters, jars of preparations lining the shelves, and wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Place suits you," he commented, "looking more like a proper healer's workshop every day." "It feels right," Willa agreed, returning to her work table. "Did you need something?" Ethan seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Buchanan's sending me to Denver tomorrow. Supply run and some business with the cattle broker. Thought you might want to come along. Town's got an apothecary shop that might have things you can't find around here." Willa looked up in surprise. "Denver, but that's a 3-day journey each way." "About that," Ethan confirmed. "We'd be gone about 10 days total. Buchanan already said he can spare you, and Naomi's interested in some specialty goods if you're willing to select them for the store." The idea was appealing. Willa had been so focused on establishing herself at the ranch that she'd barely left the property in a month. And the prospect of spending more time with Ethan, away from their daily routines, stirred something in her she was increasingly unable to ignore. "I'd like that," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "When would we leave?" "First light," Ethan replied, a hint of relief in his tone suggesting he'd been unsure of her answer. "Pack for variable weather. Mountains can turn quickly this time of year." After Ethan left, Willa found herself humming as she packed her saddlebags for the journey. The prospect of traveling with him again brought back memories of those first days after her escape from Black Hawk, days of fear and uncertainty. Yes, but also of discovering a connection she hadn't expected. They set out at dawn the next morning, a crisp July day with the promise of heat later. Ethan had arranged for Willa to ride Daisy again, the gentle mare she'd grown comfortable with. They rode side by side now, unlike their first journey when necessity had forced them to share Sadie. "Ever been to Denver?" Ethan asked as they left the valley behind, climbing toward the mountain pass that would lead them east. Willa shook her head. "Passed near it on my way to Black Hawk, but never went into the city itself." "Is it very grand?" "Grand enough for these parts," Ethan replied with a hint of amusement. "Not New York or Chicago, but growing fast. Has its rough edges like any frontier city, but proper society too." Their journey to Denver was vastly different from their flight from Black Hawk. They followed established trails, stopped at proper way stations for the nights, and traveled at a comfortable pace that allowed for conversation and even occasional laughter. Willa found herself sharing stories of her childhood that she hadn't thought about in years, and to her surprise, Ethan gradually opened up about his own past as well. "My father wanted me to follow him into blacksmithing," he told her as they made camp on the second night, when they'd opted to sleep under the stars rather than at the crowded way station nearby. "Had my future all mapped out: apprenticeship, journeyman, eventually take over the shop." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Then the war came. I was 19, full of patriotic fervor, enlisted in the cavalry first chance I got." Willa watched his face in the firelight, seeing the shadows that crossed it when he spoke of the war, And when you came back, couldn't stand walls anymore, Ethan said simply. Or the look in my father's eyes when I woke up shouting in the night. So I headed west, figured I'd either find what I was looking for or die trying. He glanced up at her. Didn't know what I was looking for until I found Redemption Valley. And what was that? Willa asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Peace, I guess. A place where the past doesn't weigh so heavy. Willa understood that feeling all too well, the longing for somewhere to belong, somewhere the shadows couldn't reach. I think I've found that too, she said. Thanks to you. Ethan shook his head. You'd have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Still, Willa insisted, if you hadn't ridden between me and that mob. Let's just say we both got lucky that day, Ethan replied, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight as they met hers across the flames. They reached Denver late on the third day, the city spreading before them in the valley below as they crested the final ridge. Lights twinkled in windows, and smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys against the darkening sky. It was larger than Willa had imagined, with proper streets laid out in a grid, substantial buildings of brick and stone in the center, and wooden structures spreading outward. Ethan led them to a modest hotel on a side street, away from the more boisterous areas of town. Not fancy, he said as he helped Willa down from Daisy, but clean and respectable. Buchanan always stays here when he's in town. The hotel proprietor, a motherly woman named Mrs. Chen, greeted Ethan like an old friend and showed Willa to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. After the dust of travel was washed away, they met for dinner in the hotel's dining room. Seeing Ethan in the context of civilization was a new experience for Willa. He'd made an effort to clean up, his dark hair still damp from washing, his usual trail clothes exchanged for a clean shirt and vest. He looked less like the rugged frontiersman who had saved her life, and more like the gentleman she sometimes glimpsed beneath the weathered exterior. "You look nice," she said as he pulled out her chair, immediately feeling foolish for the comment. "Clean, at least," Ethan replied with a hint of self-deprecation. "Town brings out what manners my mother managed to instill." Over dinner, they discussed their plans for the next few days. Ethan had business with Buchanan's cattle broker and banking to handle, while Willa was eager to visit the apothecary and select items for Naomi's store. "We should be able to head back in 3 days," Ethan said as they finished their meal. "Unless you'd like more time in the city." 3 days seems sufficient, Willa replied. "Though I admit it's nice to sleep in a real bed for a change." Ethan's expression softened into a rare smile. "Trail life isn't for everyone. You've adapted well to Redemption, though." "It feels like home already," Willa admitted. "I never expected to find a place where I fit so well." "Place has that effect," Ethan said. "Think that's why most of us stay despite the hardships. Something about that valley." He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed by his uncharacteristic sentimentality. "I know exactly what you mean," Willa assured him. The next morning they parted ways after breakfast, agreeing to meet back at the hotel for dinner. Willa spent a glorious day exploring the city's shops, particularly the well-stocked apothecary, where she found rare herbs and preparations she'd only read about. The owner, an elderly German man named Hoffman, was delighted to discuss medicinal properties with someone knowledgeable, and offered her a special price on several items when he learned she was practicing her art in a remote settlement. Laden with packages, Willa was making her way back to the hotel late in the afternoon when a voice called her name, a voice that sent ice through her veins. "Miss Jensen, by God, it is you." Willa turned slowly to find Sheriff Holloway from Black Hawk standing on the boardwalk just yards away, his badge glinting in the sunlight. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, her mouth suddenly dry. She glanced around, gauging whether she could simply walk away, but the sheriff was already approaching. "Didn't expect to find you in Denver," he said, his tone conversational but his eyes hard. "Thought you'd have headed much farther away after what happened." Willa lifted her chin. "I've done nothing wrong, Sheriff. There's no reason for me to hide." "The Wilson boys' family might disagree," Holloway replied. "They're still mighty upset about their son." "I'm sorry for their loss," Willa said sincerely, "but I only tried to help the child. His fever was too advanced." The sheriff studied her for a moment. "Well, I'm not here to drag you back if that's what you're worried about. That mob business got out of hand, I admit that, but folks in Black Hawk wouldn't exactly welcome your return." Relief washed through Willa. "I have no intention of returning. I've found a new home." "With that gunslinger who interfered?" Holloway asked sharply. "Mr. Harlow is a respected member of the community where I now live," Willa replied, careful not to reveal too much. The sheriff snorted. "Respected? Man's got a reputation, Miss Jensen." "Did he tell you he rode with Quantrill's raiders for a time during the war, before switching sides when he saw which way the wind was blowing?" The accusation struck Willa like a physical blow. Quantrill's raiders had been notorious guerrilla fighters for the Confederacy, known for their brutality. Ethan had mentioned serving in the Union cavalry, but nothing about this. "You're mistaken," she said firmly, though doubt had crept into her mind. There was so much about Ethan's past he hadn't shared. "Am I?" Holloway's smile was unpleasant. "Ask him about Lawrence, Kansas sometime. See what he says." Before Willa could respond, a familiar voice called her name. Ethan was approaching from across the street, his expression darkening as he recognized the sheriff. "Everything all right here?" he asked, coming to stand beside Willa, his body tense. "Just catching up with an old acquaintance," Sheriff Holloway said, his hand resting casually near his gun. "Sharing some history." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Willa, the hotel's just up the street. Why don't you go on ahead?" "But please," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's face. Reluctantly, Willa moved away, but not before hearing the sheriff's parting shot. "She deserves to know who she's keeping company with, Harlow." Willa waited anxiously in the hotel lobby, her mind churning with questions. What had the sheriff meant? Could Ethan truly have been part of something as notorious as Quantrill's raiders? It didn't align with the man she'd come to know, the man who had risked himself to save a stranger, who spoke of fighting for the Union. When Ethan finally entered the hotel 20 minutes later, his expression was shuttered, giving nothing away. "What did he tell you?" he asked without preamble. Willa hesitated. He said you rode with Quantrill's raiders, that you switched sides during the war." Ethan's face hardened, but he didn't immediately deny it. "Let's not have this conversation in the lobby," he said, gesturing toward the small parlor off to the side that was currently empty. Once they were seated in the far corner of the room, Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Willa had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "It's not as simple as Holloway made it sound," he began, his voice low. "But there's truth in it. I did ride with Quantrill for 3 months when I was 18, before the war officially started." He met her eyes directly. "I didn't know what they would become. When I figured it out, I left, enlisted in the Union cavalry when war was declared." "Lawrence, Kansas," Willa said softly. The sheriff mentioned it. Pain flashed across Ethan's face. "I wasn't there for the massacre. I'd been gone almost a year by then, but I knew those men, had ridden with them." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Every man, woman, and child they killed in Lawrence. Sometimes I think their blood is on my hands too, for not stopping it somehow." Willa was quiet, absorbing this revelation. It explained so much about Ethan: the nightmares, the vigilance, the need for redemption. "Is that why you came between me and the mob? Because of Lawrence?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Partly. Saw too much of that kind of madness during the war. Swore I'd never stand by again if I could help." He looked up at her, uncertainty in his gray eyes. "Does it change things, knowing this?" Willa considered the question carefully. Did it change how she saw him? This man who had saved her life, who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, who carried the weight of the past like a physical burden. "We all have things in our past we regret," she said finally. "What matters is who you've chosen to be since then." She reached across the space between them, placing her hand over his clenched fist. "The man who rode between me and that mob, that's who you are to me." The tension gradually left Ethan's body, his hand relaxing under hers. "Not everyone's so forgiving." "I'm not everyone," Willa replied with a small smile. "And neither are you." That evening over dinner, something shifted between them. The revelation of Ethan's past, rather than driving them apart, seemed to have removed a barrier. He spoke more freely about his experiences, both during and after the war, and Willa shared her own struggles since her grandmother's death: the loneliness, the suspicion she often faced, the constant need to move on. "Never felt like I belonged anywhere," she admitted. "Until Redemption Valley." "Know the feeling," Ethan replied. "Drifted for years before finding that place, something about it. Feels like a second chance," Willa finished for him. Their eyes met across the table, and Willa felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the glass of wine she'd been sipping. The connection between them, present since that first day on the dusty road outside Black Hawk, had deepened into something she could no longer pretend was merely friendship or gratitude. The remaining days in Denver passed quickly, filled with business and shopping during the day and long conversations in the evenings. Neither of them mentioned the sheriff again or the revelations he had prompted. But Willa sensed that Ethan was lighter somehow, as if sharing his burden had eased its weight. On their final night in the city, Ethan surprised her by suggesting they attend a play at the newly built Denver theater. "Town's trying to be civilized," he explained with a hint of his dry humor. "Least we can do is encourage them." Willa wore the one good dress she had purchased during their stay, a deep green that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair. When Ethan saw her descending the hotel stairs, he stood speechless for a moment before offering his arm with formal courtesy that seemed at odds with his usual manner. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the words clearly not coming easily to a man more used to commenting on practical matters. Willa felt a blush warm her cheeks. "And you look very handsome," she replied truthfully. Ethan had clearly made an effort, wearing a proper suit coat over his usual vest and a clean white shirt with a simple black tie. The play was a light-hearted comedy that had them both laughing, a welcome respite after the intensity of their recent conversations. Walking back to the hotel under a sky full of stars, Willa felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they paused outside her hotel room door. "I can't remember the last time I attended a proper theatrical performance. Wasn't sure I remembered how to sit still that long," Ethan admitted with a slight smile, "but it was worth it." His eyes held hers, and for a moment Willa thought he might say something more, might even lean down to kiss her. But instead he stepped back slightly. "We should get an early start tomorrow. Long ride ahead." "Of course," Willa agreed, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Willa," he replied softly. Inside her room, Willa sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers touching her lips as she imagined what might have happened if Ethan had given in to whatever impulse had flickered in his eyes. Was she foolish to think he felt the same growing attraction, the same deepening connection? Perhaps he still saw her as someone he had rescued, someone under his protection. Or perhaps, knowing his past as she now did, he believed himself unworthy of happiness. Either way, Willa knew that what she felt for Ethan Harlow had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. Whether he returned those feelings was a question she wasn't yet brave enough to ask. The journey back to Redemption Valley was slower than their trip to Denver, as they were now laden with supplies for the ranch and the general store. They camped under the stars 2 nights in a row, avoiding the crowded way stations, and Willa found herself treasuring these last days alone with Ethan before they returned to their separate routines at the ranch. On the final night of their journey, camped in a meadow with the lights of Redemption Valley visible in the distance below, they sat by the fire talking long into the night. The conversation meandered through various topics until Ethan suddenly asked a question that caught Willa by surprise. "Do you ever think about moving on, finding a bigger town where your skills might be more in demand?" Willa looked at him across the flames, trying to read his expression. "No," she said honestly. "Redemption Valley is the first place that's felt like home in years. Why do you ask?" Ethan poked at the fire, not meeting her eyes. "Just wondering if it's enough for you. Small place, simple people." "It's more than enough," Willa assured him. "I have respect, useful work, a community that accepts me. What more could I want? Besides you," she added silently. "Just making sure," Ethan said, finally looking up. "Wouldn't want you to feel obligated to stay because of how you came to be there." Understanding dawned on Willa. "You think I'm staying out of gratitude to you, or because I have nowhere else to go?" "The thought crossed my mind," Ethan admitted. Willa shook her head, a mixture of frustration and fondness washing over her. This proud, complex man who could face down a mob without blinking but couldn't recognize what was right in front of him. "Ethan Harlow," she said firmly, "I stay in Redemption Valley because I want to, because it's where I belong now." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "And because it's where you are." The words hung between them, as tangible as the smoke from the fire. Ethan's head snapped up, his gray eyes wide with surprise. "Willa, you don't have to say anything," she rushed on, suddenly afraid of his response. "I just wanted you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond gratitude. But I understand if you don't." Her words were cut off as Ethan moved around the fire in 2 quick strides and knelt before her. His hand, calloused but gentle, cupped her cheek. "I've been telling myself you deserved better," he said roughly. "A man without my past. Someone who could offer you more than a drifter's life." "I don't want anyone else," Willa whispered. "Just you, exactly as you are." For a moment, Ethan seemed frozen, searching her face as if looking for confirmation of what he'd heard. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as Willa responded, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since Denver," he confessed. "Maybe longer." "Why didn't you?" Willa asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Wasn't sure you felt the same. Wasn't sure I deserved it if you did." His voice was rough with emotion. "Still not sure about that second part." Willa kissed him again, briefly but firmly. "Well, I'm sure enough for both of us." They sat together by the fire for hours after that, talking, sharing occasional kisses, planning a future neither had dared imagine before. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, it was with a sense of possibility that made even the hard ground seem comfortable. Their return to the Buchanan Ranch the next day was marked by knowing glances from the hands when they rode in side by side, clearly more than traveling companions now. Buchanan himself merely raised an eyebrow when Ethan formally asked to speak with him that evening, but there was approval in his nod. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Willa continued her work as the ranch's healer, her reputation growing as word of her skills spread throughout the valley. Ethan took on more permanent responsibilities at the ranch, no longer drifting away for months at a time. They were married that winter in a simple ceremony in the Redemption Valley Church, with Buchanan giving the bride away and Molly O'Brien weeping unabashedly in the front pew. The small cabin by the herb garden became their home, expanded with Ethan's carpentry skills to include a larger bedroom and a proper kitchen. Willa's garden flourished, as did her practice, which now included not just the ranch hands but people from town and outlying farms who sought her gentle healing. 2 years after her arrival in Redemption Valley, Willa gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Buchanan. A daughter, Sarah, followed 18 months later. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, his natural protectiveness finding perfect expression in caring for his children. On the 5th anniversary of the day Ethan had ridden between Willa and the Black Hawk mob, they stood together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the yard with the puppy Buchanan had given them as a gift. Ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly, his arm around Willa's waist. That day when I interfered in your escape. Willa looked up at him, at the face that had grown dearer to her with each passing day. The hard edges had softened somewhat over the years, though the vigilance never completely left his eyes. She touched the silver now threading through his dark hair at the temples. Not for a single moment, she replied. That day gave me everything I have now: a home, a purpose, a family. She reached up to kiss him softly. And you, my protector who became my heart. Ethan's arms tightened around her. Never thought I'd find redemption, he murmured against her hair. Let alone love. That's the thing about Redemption Valley, Willa said with a smile, leaning into his embrace as they watched their children laugh in the golden afternoon light. It gives you exactly what you need, even when you don't know you're looking for it. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became something of a legend in the valley: the healer chased by a mob, and the cowboy who didn't blink in the face of danger. But for Ethan and Willa, it was simply the beginning of a love that had saved them both, bringing healing to wounds they hadn't known could mend and creating a family that thrived in the shadow of the mountains that had brought them together. The Jensen Harlow homestead became known throughout the region as a place of healing and hospitality. Willa's medical knowledge, combined with formal training she eventually received from Dr. Green and continued study through medical journals, Ethan made sure were ordered regularly from Denver, made her an invaluable resource in a region where doctors were scarce. Ethan's steady presence and fair dealing earned him respect that eventually overshadowed the whispers about his past. Together, they built a life neither had dared to imagine in those first desperate days of their meeting: a life of purpose, community, and abiding love that only deepened with the passing years. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the sunset painted the mountains in gold and pink, they would sit together on their porch and remember that dusty road outside Black Hawk, where fate had brought them together in the most unlikely of circumstances, where courage had overcome fear and redemption had opened the door to love.